how do I make sure I'm the best fighter pilot possible? Yes, I got to study. Yes, I need to understand the mission sets. Yes, it's hard and I need to work on sims and I'm going to use all the sophistication to do that. You need to perform out here. And it's not just being ready to pull G. Your system, your electrolytes all need to be in balance so that when all hell breaks loose and chaos happens, you're ready to be as good as you can be.
Hello and welcome to the Fighter Pilot Podcast. I am your host, Vincent Aiello, call sign Jello. And you longtime listeners of the show, you should recognize my guest. He has twice been on before, but it's his first time in the studio. Billy Flynn, welcome to the Fighter Pilot Podcast again.
You know, you have me here in San Diego. Happy to be here.
Good. Well, this took a little doing, but yeah, you're not always in San Diego. What, you're up in Maryland and Canada and anywhere they want your expertise.
You give me an offer to come to San Diego and I'm taking it up on the offer. I'm happy to be in sunlight. Look, Canada is about to start 6 months of no direct sun, so I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Terrific. Well, like I said, it's the first time in the studio, so people get to see you, but you're pretty active on social media, so maybe some have seen you there. But as I remember, the first time we heard from you was episode 121 that aired in October of 2021. And for anyone who wants to go listen to that, do. But let me see if I can summarize your career, and I'm sure I'll miss a lot. But obviously from Canada, joined the Royal Canadian Air Force. You were the first student out of flight school to go directly to what we would call the Hornet, but the CF-18.
First Nugget.
The first Nugget, okay. Then you did that for a while, and I might get these slightly out of order, but then you commanded not just a squadron, but I think a wing during war, Allied force.
25 years ago.
Okay. Yep. This year. And then somewhere in the middle there, you went to test pilot school. And then you went and spent some time with the Air Force in the desert. You went to Navy test pilot school.
Yep.
Spent some time with the Air Force doing some thrust vectoring, flying some different F-16s. Then I think you got out and went and played with the Eurofighter Typhoon for a while. Then you went to Lockheed Martin. You were the senior test pilot on the F-35. You flew all three models. And since then, you've been, as I said earlier, doing the circuits, going wherever they need your expertise, talking, in some cases, lobbying for things. I'm sure I missed a lot, but does that give the viewer hopefully an idea who you are? And
doing things like you're doing, fly fishing, because we never had time as fighter pilots to do that, right? And all the years of living in Maryland and Texas where there was no skiing, I actually get to ski in the winter times now.
Oh, good.
But I am still a spokesman, not paid for, but just because it's in my heart for F-35. And a couple things about F-35 right now. Finally, Canada decided after 8 years of a fiasco to commit to the airplane. And it's pretty fun to be back in the Air Force that my father grew up in and I grew up in to see that F-35 is coming. Yeah. And since we talked, it's really changed because it's made believers in the Navy, in the Marine Corps, and in the Air Force, and all those other nations that have bought it, of what 5th Gen can do. You know, there aren't the doubters anymore. The naysayers are pretty much gone. And it really has started its life like people promised, albeit a little late. But, you know, viewers will know that it's also been in the headlines because a hockey sock of them, full of them, have been grounded and not accepted by the military because they weren't ready. TR-3, which was the hardware to support Block 4, which is the software element of that, really the upgrades that the aircraft needs to be legitimately effective and lethal in the future, were delayed, and that only now is getting unplugged and airplanes starting to be delivered. It was a self-inflicted wound by Lockheed Martin. You and I talked in our episode. It was 10 years of formal testing to accept the F-35, to get it through its paces, the A, B, and C at Pax River and at Edwards Air Force Base, and it was painful. But along the way, we made some really, really smart engineers and scientists and testers to know how to develop a jet. And when that ended, there was a real sign of relief, certainly at Lockheed Martin, and a conscious decision to work on producing airplanes and forgetting that Block 4 was coming. And a lot of the really amazing talent was let go, including testers, test pilots, and engineers. And sure enough, when it came time to mature the technologies, do the regression to get ready for TR-3 and then Block 4 there's no one around because all the talent's gone. And that has been a really expensive and very publicly painful time for Lockheed Martin. The aircraft are being accepted now in a zipper mentality. So the production line brings airplanes through ground tests and then flight tests and then delivery, and where there's space, those ones that were parked are brought back in and kind of fit in the conveyor belt. And more than 36 have been delivered now as they start to unload a parking lot full of airplanes. And then eventually those airplanes end up in the fleet.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say is, even in the state of the aircraft that our services had, it is still the most lethal, effective, survivable fighter that any of us can remember. So there is some good news that we are all, great jets in the hands of men and women that are learning how to fly it. Yeah.
It's not a remember thing for me. It's an imagination, because I'm still used to the basics of a mechanically scanned radar that we had. And,
That's right.
So it's just a different world for these folks. But let's start with a quick caveat. You used to be employed by Lockheed Martin. You no longer are, right?
I no longer
am. You don't speak for them or against them or anything else. But we titled somewhat salaciously that episode 121, What's Up with the F-35? Now, it's been 3 years since then. And I guess I want to ask you that question again, which you've already just touched on. But let me ask you this as a follow-up to what you already talked about. They've claimed the F-35 has been, quote, operational for years now. How has it not been, or how has it been, if we haven't yet had the software? Or is it just, well, it's not as good as it's going to be, but it's good enough. Let's send them out with the Marines, with the Navy, across to different countries. So how is it that we're still waiting on this premier software?
And it's like the improvements you'd get in an iOS upgrade. If you have an iPhone, it's iOS 18 that you just got. But let's go back to what everybody just received in their airplanes. It was such a leap forward. It was such a transformation for all the air forces to take on this 5th gen capability. Yeah, the U.S. Air Force had F-22s and knew something about 5th gen, but the Marine Corps didn't, right? They had Legacy Hornets and Harriers. The Navy didn't, Rhinos and Legacy Hornets and Growlers. And everybody had to take this step to deal with what's a stealth airplane going to do, and how do you employ it? And how do you manage sensor fusion? Because it's not scan radars like you and me. It's not just BFM and dropping little dumb bombs anymore. It's the sophistication of managing 10 million lines of code and training a new generation of fighter pilots. And I'll say it, and I'll regret saying it, video game addicts, but men and women who understand what all processing that information is and how to manage the displays like you and I can't do. So taking that capability on its own has been a massive effort. And then how do you integrate 5th gen with the 4th gen? So the Navy, how does that integrate? And the answer so far that I've heard from flag officers and JOs is it's fabulous. It's really an integrated package of what the 5th gen can do, what a Growler can do to help that, and then bringing the Rhinos in, carrying lots of iron. And that relationship is so intertwined now that no one would have understood that until they integrated with the fleet. So I think there's so much to learn, and the transformation of the forces is so difficult already that what will come with Block 4 and the astonishing new capabilities will fit already, because they'll understand the mindsets of how to work 5th gen.
Yeah. So where's Canada in all this? This is your, right? Again, your crusade was to bring it there, and they were, but waiting on the first aircraft?
Fall on that sword. And I did. I did publicly for so long, and fighting the press and the politicians. And they get their first jets at Luke to do the RTU training in 2026. And then at some point, assuming the infrastructure is ready in Canada, they'll get to bring jets north of the border in about 2028. But Canada is no different than Belgium or Denmark or any other nation. If you don't have the infrastructure to manage what is effectively a spy plane, the State Department's not letting you have your new toys. And in the Canadian Air Force, just like those NATO nations I mentioned, they're not ready for what is expected. And what you understood as a U.S. fighter pilot, that kind of classification level and SAP and what it means to be in a vault to do all your planning, that Air Force isn't ready for that. And so special access programs and highly classified programs that are necessarily understood by Air Force, Marine, and Navy fighter pilots is completely new to Canada and those other NATO nations. And that's a massive step forward. You better have everybody ready for that, and the hangars set and all the facilities to manage that capability. And if the construction's not done, they don't get their new toys.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So they're still building them, they're still improving them, they're still delivering to different partner nations. So
the list goes on.
Yeah.
Romania and Greece and nations you didn't think would ever buy into F-35 have bought into it.
I'm sure we could spend a whole nother episode talking about the F-35, but let's move on, because you came back on episode 148, and you actually helped me, thank you, with the interview you conducted with our buddy Tucker Hamilton, right? Cinco. And you guys were talking about one of your passion projects, if you will, auto GCAS. So auto ground collision avoidance system. And I have to quote you, by the way, on something. I was listening to some of our early conversations to prepare for today. And I think in 2021, when we recorded, you had talked about your experience with that. And you said in a couple of years, no one will ever have to die again, and I might be changing the word slightly, by a CFIT, as we call it, controlled flight into terrain. Here we are in late 2024. There was a fatality in the Navy in 22, a single-seat FA-18E. And I don't think still the whole fleet has them that I know of, but I've been out of touch for a little while. So what's up with the auto GCAS?
100% correct. The last fatality north of China Lake, Trona Gap, which you know, CFIT G-lock, G-induced loss of consciousness is likely the cause of it, and single-seat E-model, and he dies. And I went to Tailhook, so not my territory, right? Not a naval aviator. You were there.
I was.
We had a couple beverages together, but you had a following. I couldn't isolate you because you had all your groupies following you around. But I sat in some lectures there, and I listened to a question posed to a bunch of Navy 06 test pilots on the panel. And the test pilot in charge was asked, so the question was, where's auto GCAS for the Navy fleet and the Rhino fleet? And the test pilot in charge said, effectively, there's no path forward. We don't have a path forward. And it was clear that that test pilot did not understand all the technical requirements for auto GCAS. And I explained it in the show. It's relatively straightforward. And it's really hard for me to imagine that the Navy, that Boeing, does not see the value of putting this in, of saving the life of the men and women that fly them. You know, we invest how much for training? What does it take to get a pilot to a Air Force? I know this for Air Force Weapons School, it's something like $15 million over the years of training. What does it take to get someone to go to Top Gun to be good enough? Millions of dollars of training, so valuable asset. And then, I don't know, what's a Rhino cost? $85 million, $90 million. So just in hull costs, how it cannot be understood by the Navy, by the testers, by my brethren at Boeing, the test pilots, that everyone needs to push for this is incomprehensible. And you're not going to snap your fingers and get it right away. You're 2 years away. You're 3 years away at testing. So even today, in 2024, if a flag officer said, I want it now, it's 3 years away until it gets to the fleet. And how many—
It's another mishap away.
Like, roll the dice and go, who are we risking out there that's going to, not just G-lock, it's spatial disorientation. It's something when some pilot's not paying attention, and it doesn't take much, like you and I both know, to hit the ground and die. And so that's just a huge chance that people are taking. And I think it is remarkably irresponsible for every senior officer that could affect this not to be falling on their sword and demanding this for the fleet and for the men and women that fly jets.
But it's not like it's adding weight to an aircraft.
It's software,
code, right?
It's code.
So it comes down to money.
It comes down to money and priority.
But
and I
you
know
just
that
talked about how much it costs to—
Well, bullets matter. You know, new bombs matter. New technology matters. I understand all of that. But also, here's what also matters. The men and women that fly the jets that we want to go to attack the bad guys, and we need to keep them alive. It's incomprehensible to me. I was sitting in the audience at Tailhook. I had to sit on my hands. I was apoplectic. I was so mad. But I'm a civilian and I'm not a Navy aviator, so I wasn't going to stand up at the mic and scream at them of how ludicrous this was. So really, this has to end. It needs to go in the jets, and it needs to protect our aviators from this point on, period.
Yeah, it is. It's bewildering, but maybe there's something I don't know and you don't know that's causing some sort of decision on this, but it doesn't seem like it from the outside.
Nope.
Is this going to become your new crusade? Because you won your last one. I mean, you were pretty vocal about F-35s in Canada. I mean, come on, you've got a platform.
We have done this, and we've worked really hard.
Okay.
Look, everybody in the Air Force understands it's in F-35, courtesy of the U.S. Air Force test pilots pushing ahead, Cinco Hamilton, who I interviewed, and his compatriots. And even at Lockheed Martin, we, the test pilots, pushed for it to be included. And we moved it ahead. It was originally scheduled for 2026. And years ago, we pushed ahead and figured out a way to shoehorn it into the software to get it in early. So if I look at my peers at Boeing, they can do the same thing in St. Louis and say, look, how do we fit this in a Super Hornet? Why is it not in T-7A that's coming as the next big trainer for the Air Force, and it will be the Navy?
Maybe.
It's actually not in the early lots of T-7. So there's lots of people that need to get on this bandwagon. Maybe I whip them and speak about it more and publicly. I thought the conversation was pretty compelling already. Apparently not.
Apparently not. So I assume my audience has some understanding of this, and maybe we should have done this at the beginning, but for those who don't, one easy connection to make is the movie Top Gun Maverick. So there's that scene where I forget the character's name, but he G-locks, right? So, and they even do a good job of like showing it as he grays out, and then I think Maverick saves the day yet again by locking him up, and I guess his radar warning receiver wakes him up.
Because that happens for real.
But the point being here is, had that aircraft been equipped with that, it would have saved him from hitting the ground had he still been asleep. Instead, he wakes up because of the sound and pulls up. But as we just talked about, there was a mishap in 2022 where that did not happen. And oh, by the way, the only mishap ever of any Top Gun student was a CFIT. And it could have saved him.
Everybody go on YouTube and Google or type in Sully 22, Sully 22. That incident that's videotaped is the first auto GCAS save. It was an F-16 student in Tucson, Arizona, doing 1v1 BFM. He blacks himself out. He's a foreigner. He's Dutch or Danish or Norwegian. He's a young kid,
right,
pulling 8+ G, blacks himself out. His instructor's screaming at him to wake up. And the auto GCAS symbol comes together in the HUD. The chevrons meet. This aircraft pulls 9 in the recovery, and he wakes back up and, obviously gets his act together and flies home. It's the first real live save. And you can translate that to every G-lock event that ended in a fatality, and the same equivalent system would have saved someone who's asleep, who doesn't have, not conscious. And one of the things we learned in all the accident reviews of the team that I was on, the NASA Skunkworks AFRL team, was we looked at all the old accidents in the Air Force. And in every single time, all the warning systems, bells and whistles are going off. But the humans either blacked out or they're spatially disoriented, and they don't recognize that. And they don't react. Everything's working. All the systems that we think are working are, but their brains can't figure it out, and they end up killing themselves. So just like in the movie Top Gun, bells and whistles are screaming, the voices scream and pull up, but he's asleep, and, Maverick saves him.
Yeah.
So the system needs to be in there for every airplane that's out there from this point forward.
And did you tell me in a previous conversation that you, in an airplane one day, in effect, dare I put it this way, tried to commit suicide and the system saved you? Like you wanted to prove it?
Okay, I'm not suicidal. You're going to have me locked up, and some psychologist is never going to let me fly.
Let me put it differently. You literally flew the thing and said, if the system doesn't save me, I'm going to die.
Okay,
Am I still putting it wrong?
Yes, I flew at the Rock, northeast of Edwards, at a rock we call GCAS Mountain, where we had understood the topography perfectly, and we had perfectly mapped the ground through iterations of auto GCAS testing. At the very end of it, I knew what we needed was really compelling video. And we needed to show the flag officers to the general officers what this system really could do. And so we really were told we could fly the low-level routes around Edwards and China Lake that you've certainly flown, really at no limit. Effectively, we were told 100 feet, but really no limit. And I wasn't the lowest of the guys, but we needed really compelling video. And then I purposely went out there and flew at the Rock, at GCAS Mountain, at the Rock. And if it didn't pull up, no, you're right. I'm going to hit the Rock, knowing that it was going to pull me off, and the miss is really, really close. But in fact, the system works. And what we learned in our testing was that it was so impressive that you and I could not fly as close to the ground as the system would let us. So when it took over, it was far beyond our threshold. We would have pulled up long before. It flies closer, and then it says, look, I gotta save you now. Yeah. So it never was a nuisance to us because it was so well tuned beyond the human's capability. So yes, no, I'm not suicidal. I'm pretty balanced, happily married, got kids, nothing wrong with my life. But yes, I flew at the Rock on purpose.
YouTube loves the salacious stuff. So we're just going to cut that one part and call out the episode.
Between Transport Canada and the FAA, they're never going to let me fly again.
Well, hopefully they listen to the whole thing. So anyway, Billy, we coined this show, the Fighter Pilot Podcast, the aircraft, the weapon system, most importantly, the people. You've been on the show a couple of times now. You've talked about the aircraft, and we just did touch on the F-35 again. Talked about maybe not a weapon system, but an avionics system. But I've already seen it. I mean, you really have a heart for, most importantly, the people. And dare I say, and of course I know what we're going to talk about today, but that's something we don't put maybe as much attention or money towards.
You run the Fighter Pilot Podcast, not the Fighter Jet Podcast, and we don't talk about the pilots. And really one of the things I've learned over the years of flying as long as I did, in 40 years, was about human performance and about what it took to focus on the men and women that fly the jet and how to make them perform better and how we need now to frame the reference of how we look at them. Look, we fly, I don't know, $100 million airplanes.
Yeah, F-35.
The Secretary of the Air Force just at AFA in Washington, D.C., the Air Force and Space Force Association said the 3 priorities for the Air Force, 3 priorities. China, China, and China, right? From the Ukraine, we understand that really near-peer threats exist. China's clearly a threat. The Arctic's being threatened to us. We're up against a serious adversary. When we look at China, which is really a pacing threat for the U.S. military, we know that if we have to fight them, we're going to be outnumbered 4-1, okay? And we're going to fly a long, long way from home base. This isn't a 1-hour sortie in the Cold War out of Germany, fight the bad guys, come back across the East German border and back home. We're hours in the jet transiting. We're going to refuel along the way. Then we're going to have to fight outnumbered 4-1 against a threat that's going to be near peer, hard. Then we're going to have to fight all the way home. That's not an hour in the jet. That's 5 hours in the jet. That's some significant period in the jet. We're going to have to be physically, physiologically, and more mentally focused than ever before. And how do we look at the human to do that? And how do we prepare them to do that? And oh, by the way, guess what's coming? And that's drones or collaborative combat aircraft, CCAs, that we're controlling in 5th gen and if 6th gen happens, cockpits. So you and I, or the generation after us, aren't just flying 5th gen airplanes, they're controlling CCAs from their cockpits. And that workload is generations more complex than what we did. So how do we keep the men and women really focused? And look, I don't want people to be gym rats, and I don't want people to change what they're eating so they're granola eating, Birkenstock wearing, tree hugging vegans. But I want us to talk about nutrition. I want to talk about hydration. I want to talk about fitness. I want to talk about mental acuity so that when they go to fight against China, they win and they don't leave behind a $100 million airplane and cease to become survivable. And so I'll finish the prelude to this to say is you need to start teaching fighter pilots to think like tactical athletes, to think like high-performance athletes. And you and I'm going to lead you into LeBron James and Tom Brady, whether you like him or not, or Jaromir Jagr in hockey, and talk about how supreme athletes maintain that high level of fitness throughout their careers and how we need to migrate ourselves from the good old days of hardcore fighter pilots.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's a new topic, dare I say, right? I mean, every 2 years, summer and winter Olympics, you see these athletes at the absolute pinnacle of their personal capability, but also human because they work their way and win along the way. But when you see someone line up, let's say for the 100-meter dash, you expect, at least I do, that they've got a coach. They've been running. They've probably got the right shoes. They've probably got the right outfit that's not going to be draggy or binding. And I don't know, at least for an athlete, I do think that they should be getting the right sleep. They should be properly hydrated. They should be eating the right foods. You don't expect to see them, except for in a commercial with a candy bar or a soda. And so to me, I see that in the Olympics. I see it I like to watch, football. And I assume those athletes have the same thing to make sure they're at their peak performance. Is it just, okay, yeah, I need to learn this. Let's say I'm, 30 years back, whatever. But it's not something I just know as a kid or growing up. It's not something I'm taught in high school or college. Is it something being taught in flight school, or is it something we need to start teaching? Where do we get this equivalent of what the athletes get?
Yeah, how do we get there? Look, an athlete's only job is to run a 10-second race and a 100-meter dash. And that person that's perfectly dressed with the right shoes and the right clothing, oh, by the way, stretched or ready to go, that person hydrated the right amount before and ate the right things hours before, and you backed up that person days for that single 10-second event, right? A football player, Tom Brady, Josh Allen, Sunday afternoon's game was backed up 7 days, and every part leading up to that performance was orchestrated. And if we start thinking as performances is what we're doing as fighter pilots, then we're going to start to understand why the things that we should be doing. Your mom told you to drink more water and eat more greens and get more sleep. And now we're going to say as fighter pilots do that. Remember what our job is. Our job is to fly safe jets, drop bombs, kill bad guys. Like that's what a fighter pilot's supposed to do. And no one that I've ever met in all my years ever mastered our vocation, right? You got to learn about the airplane. You got to learn how to fly the airplane and fly the best you can. You have to learn systems, which are so complex now. You taught at Top Gun. I got to learn weapons, our weapons, everything that it can do, how to employ them, what the adversary has, all the mission sets. And oh, by the way, you're an F-35. So you're doing more mission sets before. What is it? It's an all-consuming job that you and I did, and every fighter pilot that's listening has done their whole career. Like, it's all we did, all the time. So now we're going to say to you, well, I need you to eat better and I need you to train smarter. And everybody's going to roll their eyes going, look, dude, I have no more time. And by the way, when I land, I want to go home and take my kids to soccer or to hockey practice, or I have a spouse that I love and I want to keep my family together. So how do I fit that in the day? I don't have just a trainer. This is low-hanging fruit. I can do all the great fighter pilot jobs, but let someone train me and help me understand why eating the standard American diet breakfast and having, like I saw it at Pax River at the canteen where I flew, a white Wonder Bread, processed meat, processed cheese sandwich with a diet soda and a bag of chips before a 4-hour test mission wasn't the perfect way to set myself up for success, right? How do we learn to eat smarter? And I'm going to talk about hydration at length and tactical dehydration. And you're going to smile because I'm going to hit the nail on the head. How do we do that and include that? I can tell you that if I started as an early fighter pilot and someone helped me understand, look, dude, you need to start eating like this because your performance in a 4-hour mission is going to dramatically degrade. Physically, you are not going to be ready to fight 4 hours into this unless you set this up along the way. Unless you eat the right every day, you're going to have these sugar spikes that are going to crush you when you really do need to perform. And oh, by the way, I need your focus because this is hard. It's always been hard, but it's remarkably hard now. I need you to be the sharpest possible. Here's how you're going to learn to train. And by the way, I know we all go to the gym, and American servicemen are in far better shape than from most NATO nations. Trust me, as one who came from Canada but also flew with the Europeans, they don't go to the gym and work out and run like we do in the United States. So even American fighter pilots are more fit than the other nations. That'll upset all your foreign.
I think we've already upset a bunch of groups today, so let's keep knocking them off.
If I was trained and taught properly, this is low-hanging fruit, and I start my career, and now I understand that. And now, 10 years in my career as a seasoned fighter pilot, I know how to eat properly. I know how to train. I know what hydration means to me. And when I go out in an F-35 with 20,000 pounds of gas, and I'm airborne for 2.5 hours, I'm as sharp as could be expected. Different than the generations before who ate crap.
Well, but they could, dare I say, get away with it, right? Because if I'm going out on a quick BFM hop with you in my F-18, we're going to be airborne for 35, 40 minutes, depending on the transit. We're going to pull a bunch of G's, and I just need to remember what happened for that short period of time and come back. Dare I say, and you can shoot me down, but this is always what I've thought, is the guys who smoked and ate greasy food actually did better because their blood pressure was so high.
Don't you remember? And they were short.
And short.
They were short.
Which you can't do much about, but you can affect your diet and smoking
so
and whatever else. But like you said, look, I don't want to have to pee in the flight, so I'm going to just not drink too much water. And for a 45-minute pull G's till my brains fall out flight, I can get away with that. But what I think I hear you saying is the very nature of air combat is changing. It's not just going to be, and by the way, right, there's still parts of the world that are doing this right now. Take off, fight right next to your border, and come right back, and you might have a 20-minute flight. But we're talking about, we've got this immense distance because the weapons of our adversaries are causing us to go further back. So we've got to transit that distance, which is relaxing, but not really. You're still in an airplane, especially a single engine. I feel like the requirement is changing. It's not just that we as a generation of kids grew up not knowing what's healthy and what's not, and what's okay sleep-wise and activities, but I feel like it's also that even if I knew it, now the very nature of air combat is changing because of either the threat or the capability, or maybe both, and you can tell me.
And the value of the asset you're flying. Look, an F-35 may not be a strategic national asset here in the United States because there'll be hundreds of them. But look, if you're in Denmark, or if you're in Norway or in the Netherlands or Canada, that's a strategic platform. It's not a tactical fighter anymore. It is invaluable to the entire force, integrated. Oh, by the way, again, if I'm controlling CCAs in a couple of years from now, it's not just my F-35. It's all the drones that are with me that I'm controlling. You take me out, they'll fly and they'll eventually come back home, but they're not going to affect the mission anymore. That's why the human in the cockpit is so much more important. And it's harder. It's further. It's not an hour and a half sortie. You and I in a Hornet we're going to eat up the gas pretty quickly in a Legacy Hornet,
Mm-hmm.
even in a Viper, right, which you flew and I flew. That gas is going through pretty quickly when you just plug it in afterburner and never take it out. But I'm going to fly hours on end, and I'm going to be in a cockpit exposed differently than I have been in all the generations previously. So now I go back and say, how do I make sure I'm the best fighter pilot possible? Yes, I got to study. Yes, I need to understand the mission sets. Yes, it's hard and I need to work on sims and I'm going to use all the sophistication to do that. But I need to walk out there every day knowing that if that's 3% better for me, if I'm 5% better, then give me that edge against my adversary.
That might be the
they're going to
difference.
kick my ass.
Mm-hmm.
Like, really? I'm going to outnumbered 4-1? You and I on our best day were what? Maybe we were twice as good as our adversaries. Maybe on an amazing day, we certainly weren't 4-1 better. We certainly weren't 20-1 better. But we're going to face really terrifying odds if the worst happens. And I need every man and woman to be a rock star, a high-end athlete every time out there. So it is nutrition. It is understanding what you have for breakfast that is sugar spikes. It's whether it's protein or carbs and how I balance the day. It's not a Snickers bar, and it better not be Skittles in your pocket. And I'll make the analogy because I had a peer who had a case of Dr. Diet Pepper underneath his desk. You better not be drinking that walking out to an airplane. I better understand all of that. The simple part of it, that's low-hanging fruit. And if I teach someone early in at least fighter lead-in training, maybe not in undergrad pilot training or whatever we call it in whatever Air Forces, maybe that's not the place. But when I get into tactical training and start teaching them that you need to perform out here, and it's not just being ready to pull G, your system, your electrolytes all need to be in balance so that when all hell breaks loose and chaos happens, you're ready to be as good as you can be. Okay, so that's the human performance. Change our mindset, start thinking of ourselves as tactical athletes. Now, programs exist. The U.S. Air Force has one in Air Combat Command called Optimizing the Human Weapons System, OHWS. And it's beginning to put that in squadrons. So training, not just go to the gym and we do curls and we do bench press and we do squats, but understanding very specific training. What happens when you and I get hurt after BFM hop? Remember the Viper? And we cranked our necks and, we blow a back muscle and we BS our way through the next day with a bunch of Motrin or whatever we could do over the counter, but we hurt. Why not come back and heal so that we can go fly again? Learn how to eat. And then, by the way, understand hydration. It's Phoenix, Arizona just did 100 days of more than 100 degrees each day. At Luke Air Force Base, walking out to fly an F-35, as soon as you get out the door, you're in trouble. It's 100 degrees. You're already fighting dehydration. And I'm going to go fly an hour and a half, 2 hours sortie. I got a hydration problem.
In a greenhouse.
Oh my God.
Covered in thick green clothing.
Big F-35 gear. I'm just baking in there. And so that leads me to the elephant in the room. And that is, the topic is called tactical dehydration. So I know in Yuma, in Luke Air Force Base, maybe even here in Miramar, it's hot. The sun's out there. I'm baking in the greenhouse effect of a fighter. And what do we all do? And by the way, you did it, I did it, and every single fighter pilot for 50 years has done that. We stopped drinking 2 hours before a flight. Why? We stopped drinking coffee for certain. Why? We don't want to have to pee in the jet. Okay, why don't we have to pee in the jet? Don't want to? Because it's a really awkward task. And so I stopped drinking ahead of time, right? I go fly my hour sortie or my 35-minute BFM hop, and when I come back, I'll drink. But what have I done along the way in that 35-minute sortie? Well, I stopped drinking effectively for 3 hours. If I go fly a longer sortie, I stopped 2 hours drinking before I flew. I flew for, by the way, I know the stories of it. A woman who flew in Afghanistan, a combat sortie, 8 hours of not drinking anything so she wouldn't pee. I have not consumed liquids for 10 hours. You tell me how effective that human is at the end of it all. I can tell you they're not peak performing. Tactical dehydration. And by the way, I got show and tell. I got props. So here's what men got through for all these years. Well, they're actually called piddle packs, right? This is an old one, has sponge in it. By the way, it was in my helmet bag, so I pulled it from home. And this one has powder, and you'd open this thing up. It's like a big freezer bag. You'd pee in it. It absorbs the pee. You'd wrap it up and throw it away. So that task, you threw a Viper. So in Viper, it was actually pretty easy. You loosen lap belts, and you worked through the peeing in this little basket or bag and then zipping back up. In an F-35, in the very complex Martin Baker 16 strap system, You have to safe the seat, unstrap completely from the jet,
Wow.
then pee into this bag, then put it all away. That's a bad way to put it. And then strap back in and arm the seat. That's assuming you're not flying over the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean where you're wearing a dry suit, where you have to fight through the dry suit at the end of all that to make that even more complex. And that's only for a guy. And for women, your option is wearing a diaper. Seriously? Like in 2024, we're asking them to wear diapers. And so this notion of tactical dehydration is the biggest risk of anything that we talk about, because we have for generations, back in my father's days, we have cheated ourselves by not consuming liquids before flying, not consuming liquids when we fly, just because we didn't want to pee in the airplane. If you're 3% dehydrated, you have reduced your G tolerance by 50%.
Wow.
And so, more props. Why don't we have... It's noon tablets for everybody that knows electrolytes, but it's water. And I used to fly with Perrier, and it was always a joke that I had a Perrier bottle. Because what we understood is you need to be drinking when you're flying. It's 100 degrees walking out the door at Edwards Air Force Base. You taxi out in a greenhouse effect. You're airborne for 2 hours. Everybody needs the hydration or the electrolytes that come with that. And yet we didn't do it. And we didn't do it because we didn't want to touch a pedal pack. It's beyond absurd.
But it's more than just the G tolerance, right? If I'm dehydrated, my mental acuity is reduced as well.
Your mental acuity. So the decision-making, that sharp, aggressive, perfect decision-making when chaos happens or in a fight when you shoot or you understand the lead-in of a tactical engagement, you're not as sharp as you can be. So you've sacrificed your best capability because your brain's just not there. So what did you do in the Marshall stack going on the boat before you spiraled down to an approach? Because so many naval aviators have told me the one thing they did was pee before it was their turn to take that out of their mind and get that out of their head. Is that, am I on?
It depended on the flight. Yeah, I was going to ask you, you're going to drink that to prove it? Okay, good. It depended on the flight. If we were going over Iraq and it was a 4, 5, 6 hour flight, I might come back with 2 or 3 of these. And at that point, you just accept that, hey, I'm not going to make it, so I might as well just go ahead and hydrate, to your point. But for me personally, if it was an hour 30 cycle, I didn't always necessarily need to before, because generally speaking, I did exactly what you said. I would drink enough during the day, but not so much that I thought it would be an issue.
That guy at the 100-meter dash, you can be certain when they're at the blocks, their whole body is ready to go, and there's no discomfort because they didn't urinate, 20 minutes before to get it out of their system. They want their heads completely in the game for that particular performance. And I look at that the same way for a fighter pilot. If I can treat the men and women like athletes, then they're going to start thinking about what does it take for me in that performance, which is effectively flying a $100 million airplane, to be as sharp mental acuity as possible. So I make the right decisions and I don't make the mistakes. And that gets into electrolytes and physiological balance, not imbalance, and not drinking for hours. Look, every country that I've ever been in and flown, everybody has done the same thing. And when I speak in audiences, including retired general officers, and I talk about this, it's an awkward topic, but I don't know, I'm not afraid to talk about it. They all start smiling, right? They were Eagle guys, they were Tomcat guys, they're Hornet guys, and they're all going, yep, that was me. I stopped drinking hours before because we've done this as an institution. If the civilians understood that the men and women flying those airplanes were doing that to themselves, they would start screaming about how ludicrous this is. So I've talked about a problem and tried to identify why it really should matter to us. And there are solutions. In 2015, now some years ago, when I was at Pax River flying F-35Bs and Cs, we tested a system. It was called AMXD Max, and it was a generation of an automatic in-flight bladder release system. And so I'm a former hockey player, like a wannabe NHLer, right? I was no good, but I wanted to be one. And it was like a hockey cup or a baseball catcher's cup, and then attached to a hose that had a sensor in it that sensed the saline content of the urine, so the salt content. And it would kick on a motor automatically and then pump away the urine into a bag that would sit next to my helmet bag or even through a dry suit connection into a bag. And I didn't have to do anything but just fly. And when it was time in this cycle of hydrating and then urinating or relieving myself, it would all happen automatically. And I didn't have to unstrap. I didn't have to use a pedal pack like I had for so many years. And the system worked. And then I used it when we went to Finland in the competition, F-35 against 5 other fighters to win the Finland competition. We were going across the ocean in February wearing immersion suits. And oh, by the way, Arctic gear on top of our flying gear and our immersion suits. It was brutal. And there's no way a pedal pack would have worked. So we ferried across the ocean, right over Greenland, Iceland into Finland, using this system, and all became converts of what it does. And it's made by a company out of Burlington, Vermont called Omni Defense Technologies. The latest version is called Skydrate. It's cleared for Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force airplanes. And pilots are slowly starting to accept the value of it, especially the women who have the equivalent of a pad they would wear with the same technology that then works for them like the male cup does. I'm in this conversation of human performance trying to explain why tactical dehydration is such a risk and why the overall human performance matters, because it's a $100 million jet, because it's complex mission sets, and because the threat is so different than we had before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and there's risk to sitting, dare I say, right, in your own urine. I mean, it's not healthy. So you have to have something that pulls it away, removes it, so that you're not just languishing in it. But again, you touched on it before. How do we get this conversation started? You opined that maybe it's not in flight school. I would submit even a flight school student, any student, can do better if they're properly rested, nourished, hydrated, etc. But how do we start this conversation? I mean, you and I are, but who knows how many people will watch this? But how do we get this into the mainstream?
I don't know the answer, except that if you went to someone in flight school and you remember how hard it was, we all had to work, on any given day, we could fail, whatever Air Force it is, it's a red X or it's a failure, and then you get a re-ride, and if you screw that up, you're out. And it's really hard to be living on that edge. If someone came to you and said, look, Jello, or before you got your call sign, hey, Vincent, I'm going to help you here. I'm going to train you of these things that are going to give you a better chance of passing, so that every day that you go up, I know you're going to study hard, you're going to work hard in the sim, you're going to work really hard in academics, but you're going to be sharper. Your body's going to be more ready for the aggressive maneuvers on this super hot, muggy day, and you'll have this much better chance of passing. You and I are going to bet on that person. It's like having a trainer. I'm going, you give me that, and I won't fail a BFM ride, right? Or I'm going to pass a surface-to-air attack mission. And everyone's going to pick up on that. And if we could stand in front of young students and say, look, dude, I'm going to give you a 5% better chance of passing. You're not going to fail, and you're going to carry this the rest of your fighter career, people would take you up on that. And I just don't know that people have articulated, experienced people have articulated that like you and I. Look, it's hard to go to a 10-year fighter pilot and go, I want you to start eating, protein shakes in the morning, no more Pop-Tarts, and get the frozen burritos out of your freezer. You can't have that for lunch, by the way. And, oh, by the way, knock off the diet sodas. A 10-year fighter pilot's not going to do that. We know at some point in our career what it took for us to be good, right? We all know the routines, and we studied hard enough, and we're good enough at the game. But if you start earlier in their careers, then young aviators are going to understand the value of this. And that also means, well, by the way, those senior officers, understand the value of those men and women. I want them to come back every time. I can't afford to lose an F-35C, period. So I want them to be as sharp as can be every time. And oh, by the way, I need them to be as good as possible every single time they fly. And it becomes cumulative on how good they are.
Well, and it just, I think, needs to be added to the dialogue, because in your example, when you said, imagine someone coming and telling you the things that you said in your example, I was thinking back to my own experiences, and I said, people did that just on different subjects. We got trained ejection seat. This is how to get in it. This is how to put your head if you have to use it. This is how you're going to do your parachute landing fall when you get down to the ground or in the water. So various things were included to aid my performance, but not everything. And so I think this just needs to be added, it sounds like, because it's just been overlooked.
I speak at aviation life support conferences about this, but I'm talking to a bunch of physiologists. There's no operators in the group. There's no fighter pilots there. There's no weapons instructors there that would look back and go, you know what? I wish I could tell my students to do this, and they would have been better. If you look back at the men and women that you trained with in pilot training that didn't make it, if we could have gone back and given them that little bit of extra, they might have passed those rides and not got behind the eight ball. Some would have, right? Some didn't fit. But I know enough to go that probably had the right aptitude, that just had a bad day or two. And if I could isolate that and say, look, if I could have set you up better, you would have made it and you would have got over that hump. Part of this too, I'll just go off on the last tangent of the many, right, is the coaching for the mental toughness that says, how do you get back up the horse? We all fail. I failed certainly enough times in pilot training. What does it take to create that resiliency to not let it get in your head so that you can go back the next day and have revenge and pass the ride and move forward and move ahead and use the failures as steps to success? And that we don't do yet. And part of these programs need to be that, the mental fitness. I don't want to say mental toughness because that sounds like a bunch of Neanderthals, but the mental fitness to go, okay, here's what happens when you fail, and here's how to go deal with that so that you go up the next day and you learn to succeed. Those become the things we champion later in life, right? The things that made us get character and be good. But some people just fail at that point and they don't get the push to help them across that. And that is another part of this whole equation of fitness, of training athletes, training fighter pilots to be like athletes.
No, I mean, it makes sense because we are choosing to train certain things. And yet now we're identifying there's these other things, other factors that affect performance. And yet we've never taught to them. We just need to start. We had Hazard Lee in that seat. He was on the show some time ago. And I think he had a hand in some of that coming to the Air Force. Is it picking up steam? I mean, you tell me.
I don't think it has.
Not enough?
I think we're still circling the wagons trying to get people to buy into this. And maybe it takes people like me and Hazard Lee to stand in front of microphones and not be afraid to talk about these subjects to get it in the psyche of people.
Yeah.
Again, to be a great fighter pilot, you got to fly a good airplane, drop bombs, kill bad guys. And this stuff sounds a little granola to some people, but I view it as low-hanging fruit. I view this as easy stuff. I flew for 41 years, and part of my secret was living the monk-like existence that was get up in the morning and go work out every morning, and I knew how to eat better, and I could see the difference in performance, me against the youngins who had the Wonder Bread, processed meat, processed cheese, diet soda, bag of chips for lunch. There's a difference in the test world when it really is apples to apples comparison. And it helps me have the confidence to have this conversation of how this works. When you look, I'm a hockey guy, right? Jaromir Jagr grew up in the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic, and he played for the Pittsburgh Penguins for most of his career. Rock star, amazing talent. And he lived one of these existences where he was the first guy on the ice, he was the last guy off the ice, but he also trained himself and did the exercises that back in the day no one did. Back in the day in hockey, you finished a game at night, had a shower, and you went to the bar and drank beer till whatever, in the morning, got some sleep and got up the next morning and did the same thing. And guys like Jaromir Jagr lived super long careers because they didn't do that. They went and trained and understood how to get ready for the next exercise. How did Tom Brady last this long? How has LeBron James lasted this long? It's because they do all those low-hanging fruit things right. And that's the difference between their careers lasting as long as they have and performing at peak levels versus someone who, gets through with innate natural talent in the beginning and can't sustain it. Yeah. I see so much value to this at such an easy cost.
Yeah. But I wonder, a guy like LeBron James or Tom Brady probably benefits from, dare I say, almost unlimited resources, right? To play at that level in either of those sports requires people to be able to coach you, whether it's the way he throws the ball, in the case of Tom Brady, or what he's eating and what he's drinking. And I feel like that is, dare I say, maybe a little exclusive to certain people. And maybe what I hear you saying is it should not be exclusive to military aviators because we need that little extra edge just to make sure that we have the stamina to actually perform at our best. Because in the future, it's not just a 30-minute BFM ride that we might do right over our border. It might be a 6-hour evolution where you have to be on your game, all of it. And then there might be a burst of activity where you really need to act at that 100%. But the rest of it, you got to still be pretty keyed up, and that's not easy.
None of it's easy, right? And so it isn't just transiting in some place and land at the far end, not to pick on airline pilots. And
that's what I do now, but we still need our rest.
You need to be sharp. And so we don't have unlimited resources. And again, we don't have unlimited time. We all have families. Look, at the end of the day, I want to go to my kids' hockey practice, right? Or you want to go hang out with your boys. I want to have a life and a marriage and something beyond flying. And I don't have all day just to do that, where my only job is to train. So I need to make this available to fit in the part of the day that I have time, or I need to train this to be part of a lifestyle that I carry my whole career. And that's why starting it early. Again, I'll come back to it. You give me 5% better me every single time, I'm taking that. And if I look at the near-death experiences that I had flying over those years, and if I could isolate that event and back it out and go, how was I leading in? Did I sleep? Did I drink the night before? Did I sleep enough? What did I eat for breakfast? Was I ready? Because when I flew an hour in, all hell broke loose and I barely made it out, or I crashed an airplane. I was in a crash. And if I back it out, can I really say, look, I did all those things right? I don't know that I can.
Yeah.
And it just took all those years to get smart enough to now be able to talk about it.
Yeah. Are there some tangible things that you might be willing to offer someone who's watching this? Maybe it's a young person in flight school. And to your earlier point, I did have some folks at Tailhook come up to me and say, I listened to you all through flight school. So that was cool, but I wouldn't say I had an entourage. At any rate, maybe there's a young woman or man who's listening or watching and says, I want to do 5% better. What are some things? We've talked about hydration, but how does he or she know if they're properly hydrated? What foods? I mean, we've thrown a couple spears here at Snickers and others, white bread, but what are some things people can do? And sleep, right? That's another big one.
Your mom and dad told you, eat more greens, drink more water, you need to get more sleep. And here we are later in life going, I eat more greens, I drink more water, and I get more sleep. Look, the programs that are just in their nascent state with the U.S. Air Force optimizing the human weapons system. The Army has one now. It's being pressed out for all soldiers, understanding the value of making soldiers the best. Those programs are trying. They're trying to understand how to teach that. And I think on the squadrons, as they pull and ask for that, then they'll get solidified and they'll become an institution. But I don't know that happens in the Navy. I'm certain from all the naval aviators that I was associated with that what you eat on the ship, on the boat, isn't like top nutrition list of all time, right? So
that is true.
It's going to be hard to get the squadrons to understand that. But then again, it's an education. It's a push-pull element of that. And the push part of that is the JOs going, look, we need systems to help us out here. We need to be smart about this on our squadrons. Hey, boss, how come we don't have this? How come we don't go to NAVAIR, Naval Air Systems Command, and ask them for this kind of support? And what's the cost of it? Really, what is the cost? $100 million airplanes on the line, all those aviators that we spent millions to train. What's the cost to give them the tiniest little bit of support, of better food, of trainers in the squadrons, or in a trainer in a squadron focused on all the aviators to help them understand the kind of training they need to be doing very specific to them? That's a pretty small price to pay for the value of them and the airplanes they're flying and the mission sets that we're asking them to be excellent at. Yeah.
I get it. And I was fortunate to grow up in a house that was pretty healthy. So you were talking earlier
about... Well, the vegans in California are going to come slaughter me when I walk out the door here and you drive me back. I think the funniest thing is the pushback to get away from piddle packs and to talk about, an automatic bladder relief system that really has proven to be so successful with so much money invested in and so many aviators perfecting it. It's just in the minds of aviators that they just aren't willing to give up their old habits to use some technology that's going to benefit them. And I think that has to come with this whole conversation of how do I be better in the jet every single time?
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's the point is we're not going to necessarily sit here and say, hey, drink enough water that you're peeing every 2 hours and it's mostly clear and, avoid as we've said, all those candy foods. But the point is there is information out there. We just need to become aware of it. There's best practices for sleep. Get off your electronics about an hour before you go to bed. Make your room as dark and as cool as possible, relatively. Eat whole foods and natural and real food and not junk and candy in it. So anyways, right, you and I aren't going to sit here and necessarily give people a list of things to do, but it's out there. And more importantly, we need to get the conversation started. So at the institutional level, these conversations are happening where the pilots and the aviators and everybody else, even the crews, right, them too, they can all operate at peak performance.
I love our airplanes. I love all the stuff that's coming in technologies. I love all that we are as fighter pilots and how we run our lives. Just let us use everything to our benefit to make us that much better.
Yeah.
It's not such a hokey topic when you frame it like that.
Okay. Well, I did tell our Patreon supporters who get the lead on what's going on that you were coming back to the show. And I told them I thought we were going to talk about human performance, so I let them ask questions that I'll pose to you now. One is from Mike Bridges in Arkansas. He says, tactical athletes, i.e. if this happens to you and me, right? We have the limitation of not having anyone to observe their behaviors on the sidelines like Tom Brady probably did when he was playing. So is it possible instead to embed some kind of sensor in a flight suit that would monitor hydration levels?
Yeah, there's really wearables that are out there. You and I could go get a Garmin version or some version and wear it every day. It does heart rate variable monitoring. It does monitor blood levels. There are glucose monitors you could do. Mm-hmm. So getting that into the system for fleet aviators to use is a very real possibility. Yeah. Same stuff for, amateur athletes like you and I who want to perform better. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I don't know if you remember a few years back, we had all these hypoxia issues in the F-18 community.
Sure did.
And I remember, I don't know if I'll pronounce it right, oxyometer, you can go to if you go to the hospital, they might put one on your finger and it tells you you're 98% or whatever. And I always thought, why don't they have something on our earlobe or on a finger or something in the jet? And then if, by the way, you're getting hypoxic, send a caution to the display like, hey, dude, check the cabin altitude or check your oxygen or do something. But, right, we just rely on these cues that maybe we're going to be able to pick up. Maybe not if we're distracted or busy. And
bunch of that technology is coming, like eye trackers are going to come in next generation helmets.
Wow.
Technology that people have wanted for years. And so you're going to see wearables that'll be able to at least monitor that and record it. I don't know how we fit it in real time, but that stuff is not far away. It necessarily exists for the wannabe professional athletes that are out there now.
Yeah. Terrific. All right. Next one is from Niels Hansen. How do you account for the intangibles of spirit, these are in quotes, pride, camaraderie, love, etc., as powerful but hard to measure elements that have historically driven humans beyond what was thought capable? I picture Medal of Honor recipients here, for example. I think that's a really interesting question.
Well, and it is. So what we've talked about now is low-hanging fruit and making you and I, the average Joes, a little bit better. I'll tell you my observation from combat, right? I commanded a wing in combat. There were 69 aviators that flew in Operation Allied Force, CF-18s, 25 years ago. And I watched them all. And as the boss, I basically saw every single bomb drop event, every video. And I can tell you that I watched some guys that came in the door that became warriors. And a bunch of the barflies, the cool looking ones that, every part of their demeanor was the part like you'd see in a movie, didn't go anywhere. And they were non-events. Why? Because, they spent all their time being barflies instead of studying in the vault like you expected. It's spending, 10 years being the best fighter pilots they could be. And it really was that old cliche of train like you fight like you train. I saw the difference of the two. I can't tell you where courage comes from in combat or how to develop that character, but I have seen the difference of the two. Now, what does it take to be a Medal of Honor winner or some of the astonishing stories that we know from World War II and Korea and certainly Vietnam? I don't know that. I do know that for most of us, it is years and years of work and preparation, that there's no snapping the fingers. You don't become a hero overnight.
That's right.
There were no rock stars that I ever saw that it was a light switch and, they put them in the cockpit in combat and they were magical. All of it was cumulative, hard effort over all the years that made them able to perform under the extreme stress of combat. So there's no perfect answer to that other than for me as an average Joe, it's years and years of work that lead into being able to perform under chaos.
Nick Forster says, in my experience in the Royal Air Force, now 12 years out of date, the fighter pilot community has always been competitive and historically the, quote, how do you do that's regarding human performance weren't shared or talked about. Some people could just do it, others could not. What are your thoughts on where the biggest improvements will come?
So my experience, especially as a commanding officer, was way different. I had the best fighter pilot in more than 40 years of the CF-18 fleet, was a major in my squadron. He'd done a Marine Corps exchange and he'd flown Hornets almost his entire career, and he was ruthless in his standards, and he mentored every single pilot on the squadron to fly at his standard. He passed all that he knew to everyone, including hammering me when I sucked and helping me be better. And so there was none of this me versus them or I have a secret that I'm not going to tell you. This guy made sure that everybody elevated their level to the highest possible. So I have no experience with that. What do I think happens in the future? And I've looked at those 5th gen babies now that have flown the 35 for a long time. And they're the gig economy, right? They're Gen Alphas, they're past Gen Z. They're certainly not millennials. It's Gen Alpha coming. And we have 4 boys, 31 years old to 21. So I pretty much know that age bracket of what they're capable of. And they're magical in the airplane. And they may be the gig economy and people don't have faith in them, but I am pretty certain that when all hell breaks loose, they will show the same courage under fire that every generation before has been. What are the skill sets that are unique to fifth gen? That's a whole podcast episode that we could talk about that I also spend time studying. Under it all is the same human ability to perform like we did and every generation before us.
Yeah. Derek Burney, this is our last question, says, how are we going to make the aircraft more comfortable? And can we use AI or smarter autopilot to help the pilot fly the plane? Is it possible to integrate AI to fly the aircraft, monitor communications, and perceive threats so that the pilot can sleep or rest, then alert the pilot when needed due to something changing or approaching a set waypoint? Now, he didn't put it in here, but back to your example earlier, we might have this very long transit, and I hope this is where he's talking about it, or on the way back, but not obviously in combat. But right, if a lot of our 6-hour mission is transit, I think Derek's got an interesting question, because maybe if I am in an uncomfortable setting, I'm not as fresh when I get there and I'm not as rested when I get back. Although I didn't experience this, but I remember hearing from Rico Rodriguez, Caesar, that when he was flying back from all 3 of his kills, his body went through like convulsions and stuff. So resting was not what he was going through. I just scored an aerial victory, and I just had, possibly just took a human life. And the body reacts to that in ways that I don't think he even understood at the time. So whether you can rest or not, I think Derek's question is an interesting one, is can we put more pilot relief modes into these aircraft?
Talk to anyone that ever came home from a combat mission, not like Caesar's events, but anyone. You're so wired. You're so high strung, and you get on the ground, and how you detox from that really takes a lot of effort.
Yeah.
So could we help with AI and be like a Tesla, or you driving your wife's Tesla where you're theoretically not paying attention, let the car do everything for you? You could do all that moving forward. It's more sophisticated autopilots, make it like an airliner. Sure. When I look at what AI is going to do in the cockpit, it's going to help me manage CCAs. Right? So that I manage sets of displays that allow me to manage my airplane in 1 to 5 vehicles with me. They're ISR platforms, they're bomb trucks, they're missile trucks, there's EA electronic attack support for me. Allow me to manage that. That's what AI is going to do for me. And I won't have to fly my jet as hard. And AI is going to give me different dimensions of fusion than I'm used to before. I think that's where I expect AI to help me. But yes, could you help, transit back and forth and make it easier? Sure, absolutely. I don't know that that's where I would put my investment in AI. Mm-hmm. I think you need to help me manage those drones, those CCAs, and be lethal with those. And I see that being where we invest our effort moving forward.
And in the mechanization of that example you just gave, do you foresee it being, I didn't fly the F-35 like you did, but I've seen the displays, on the simulator. Would it be like, hey, this is the situation you're facing. Here's what I think, this is the computer talking, is your best solution. And now you, as the human, are either concurring with that and execute, or no, I want to do something slightly different. In other words, right? Is it going to be like teed up, perhaps, of
in an unclassified conversation that we're going to have?
See, I'm just guessing at this. So if I'm actually,
pretty close.
If I'm going over the line, you got to tell me. But
give me a display that shows me everything, and then help me understand who's the nearest asset to it, so that I can use myself and what I carry or what the bomb truck is carrying, because he's in a different part of the sky. Let me see the broad scope of everything that I'm capable of managing, and then let me decide or cue me what weapon I ought to use from what asset. And that's not all that complex to do. So give me that big picture. I'll tell you what really gets me in a fighter now. If you said, what's the next thing beyond sensor fusion? I want optical fusion. So what you and I have done in our legacy airplanes is we looked at an electro-optical display, like a TV display, and we managed a lightning pod or a sniper pod, and we managed what's in our helmet. And then in F-35, I have our displays from the distributed aperture system, and I have to manage all the things that I see. I've got to build a synthetic aperture radar map of a target that I want. I'm doing all those actions, yet on another display, sensor fusion gives me the God's eye view of everything out there. can I just get to the next level? If I don't care if it's a SAR, a synthetic aperture radar picture, it's an electro-optical image, it's IR, it's TV, I don't care. Just give it to me. Let me see the ground in front of me. Show me Google Earth or the digital terrain elevation data that presents it, but let's call it Google Earth. Let me see in whatever spectrums you have, and let me go out and see where the topic is that I'm supposed to look at, where the target is. Let me zoom in, and I don't need to be managing a sniper pod anymore and some other display and what image is in my helmet. Just let me see it all. And now my task becomes so much simpler. I need to see that moving forward. And if AI can do that for me, I absolutely want that investment in that technology.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, Billy, I want to come back to a question I asked you before. Is there something we can give people watching or listening to take away from this? Whether it's, hey, if you're in a squadron, go start having the conversations with other people. Or, hey, avoid these foods, eat those foods. Avoid this before bed or get this kind of rest. I mean, I don't know. It's an interesting discussion, but I still feel like we can't just talk about it. And maybe you and I aren't going to solve this anyway, but what can people watching or listening go do right now today?
Every JO needs to go and push uphill and start clamoring for this. And next year at Tailhook, I want to be in the panel where the JOs walk up to the microphone to the flag officers and go, "Sir, we need this kind of support. You expect me to go fly an F-35C, or I'm a Growler pilot, and you expect us to go do these high-threat missions. I need the support to be the best I can." And push, it goes both ways, because then the flag officers are going to go, holy cow, you're right, young man or young woman. This is a hard mission set, and we need to support you better. And this is not a lot of coin for what we're investing in this already. So it goes both ways, right? Up and down. And that's, I think, the real effectiveness in a Navy world, and I certainly have finally seen it at Tailhook, besides the drinking at 10 in the morning or whatever, was understanding that the young aviators get to push up the line and have a direct line to the flag officers that can make things happen. So it's an education for them.
But then back to the top of our conversation today, because how confident is that young person who heard from you, if they weren't in that panel and I wasn't, that they won't even spend the money, if I can sort of say they and point fingers here, on auto GCAS, which we know saves lives in aircraft. Are we confident that they're going to do this for us?
It has happened. Look at what the U.S. Air Force did with auto GCAS. Mm-hmm. That was Cinco Hamilton and his peers at the Joint Program Office and at Edwards Air Force Base that started screaming for it.
Pounding and climbing on the table.
And I'll give credit to us at Lockheed Martin. We were already on board. We'd done it in a version of S-16, and we were hammering our own company. And the company leadership knew the value of this. No money attached. They knew the value of this. And everybody got it. But it really give all the credit to the U.S. Air Force test pilots who screamed for it, the operators, right? And that's what made it happen. That it's the groundswell of support. So the answer to your question is, the JO's got to create the groundswell of support. You want auto GCAS and rhinos? You start screaming. You start writing articles in Navy journals, and you start demanding the flag officers answer. Demanding. You're a JO. Okay, so maybe you're not.
Go for it.
It's the career-ending, fall-on-your-sword conversation to say, "Sir, we need to have this. We can't afford to lose another naval aviator. You got to save me and my family. Protect us." It goes both ways. Go make some noise, and that's how things are going to happen.
Yeah. Good stuff, Billy. Is this something you're doing like in a professional capacity, or is this just a passion of yours, or where are you at on all this?
Well, I won F-35 in Canada, so I needed to go find the next hill to die on.
Yeah.
It really falls out with what I did for a living and what I learned, albeit slowly, of my lifestyle and how to survive for 40 plus years as a fighter pilot. And I just knew I needed to pass that on. There was just so many lessons learned from a lifetime of that really would help the men and women that are out there now. Yeah.
Well, I hope you are able to make some more things happen like you did before, because I am a convert. I think I knew it anyway, but certainly it's a conversation we need to be having. It's a skill set squadrons need, and whether it's a flight surgeon maybe, or another billet that's added to squadrons for someone who's, I forget whose question it was, I think maybe Mike, somebody on the sidelines who's watching and saying, hey, you need to probably hydrate better or eat better foods or sleep better or whatever, because there's a lot to it. And the ability to operate at peak performance, it involves a lot of different things. And we've only touched on just a couple today, but I'm with you. Tell me where I can raise my voice and I'll be right there with you.
Yeah.
What else are you working on? I mean, not to change the subject, but anything else keeping you busy these days?
I'm writing a book.
You are?
Oh, that sounds like an echo because you're writing your book.
Writing a book, yeah.
Someone else is writing a book.
In so much as I have a book project that I sometimes write in.
I've really focused on the book, Fate, Luck, and Choice. I look back at the times in my career of things I've learned from and have put the book together. My goal is to have it out next spring.
Is that the title? That's a great title.
Fate, Luck, and Choice.
Okay, good.
And it's really a topic I'm going to introduce to you called meta-elasticity. Look, I have no innate talent. There's nothing special of any DNA or any skill set that I was given. But I learned over deliberate training and being resilient of how to turn failures into successes. Mm-hmm. And I did it throughout my career, and it became cumulatively better. And I learned how to react to chaos, which has really happened so often in the test world, and to succeed from that. And it's really the conversations about how to apply that term and then how to use it productively, really clearly in the world of aviation, but I think it applies to men and women day to day. Yeah. And it's those stories, and you've heard some of them, and I have a lot more. And I've really enjoyed the focus of the project. And you and I will have a race to see who publishes on time.
You'll probably win. I am pathetically slow. Some days I feel like I'm hunting for the keys, but it's cathartic though, isn't it, to write the story? And because there's so much, at least for me, that I want to include. I'm like, well, is that important to the path of the story, the vector? And so, yeah, I'm almost done. So I'm hoping to get it in front of somebody who can start telling me about editing and publishing here by the end of the 2024, but we'll see. But
it is cathartic. Yeah. So let's talk about all our friends who were better storytellers than we might be, who had amazing stories that just haven't put the stories down. And the grandfathers who didn't talk about their experiences in whatever world war they were in, or the uncles that we didn't know were served until, they were at their grave. And I look at my peers and wonder why they don't take the time and write the stories down. Mm. And some of them are brilliant buffoonery stories, and some of them are incredibly heroic, and some of them are terrifying. Yeah. And for me, it has been of such value just in my headspace to sit down and write the stories. And my kids could care less. They couldn't possibly care.
No.
Well, maybe someday they will.
Exactly.
But they don't care right now.
Right now.
And it was important for me to put it down. Yeah. I spent 40 years. If I don't leave something behind, then why did I do all this? Where are the lessons learned from all that? And so it has really been, as you said, cathartic.
Yeah. Well, and not to pat myself on the back, but I do take some pride in knowing that this show has also done that a little bit. We've had people here, whether it's been on that side of the table or just on the microphone, that have told stories from all the wars that you mentioned earlier and things they're doing. And so, yeah, it's fun for me. I get to learn from them and have these experiences like you and I are having. But also, especially the World War II generation. We just lost Mr. Art Palmer not too long ago. He came on with Flounder talking about he was at one point jumping trains like a hobo. And then he goes off and he's flying B-25s, I think it was. In World War II, he gets shot down. I mean, incredible stories. And yeah, like you said, not everybody writes them down. These days, though, you almost should, people. I mean, come on. It's not that hard to publish. You can publish yourself.
Well, and you could tell vignettes. You don't have to write a 100,000-word book, but you can tell a story. And you can tell a
lot of little stories.
And there's no comparison of the World War II era and what those young men, but also women experienced and for such a sustained period of time at such intensity. There's no comparison to that. But it doesn't have to be.
No.
It isn't any less character building for any man or woman who jumped in a cockpit and went into combat and got shot at. A Marine who's a FAC in Afghanistan, right up on the line and living it like the Marines they were there to be a part of. All those stories are so harrowing and they need to be told. And you shouldn't take that to your grave. And it shouldn't be just a bar story when you're with your buddies and it's a Bruce Springsteen Glory Days thing. You can take the time to write it down. And whether it's on YouTube and you narrate a story or you write it down and publish it, I don't know, social media or wherever. Yeah. I really wish my peers would take the time to do that. And I'm glad I got kicked in the butt to go finally get after this. And I'm looking forward to getting the book out there and talking about it.
For sure. Well, come back and let us know when it is, and we'll be happy to help promote that and enjoy hopefully reading it as well. You said social media a moment ago. I know you're pretty active on LinkedIn. If people watch or listen and want to follow you because you are smart and articulate and good looking, where can they find you?
So thanks for all that. Let's just stop right there.
And cut.
Yep. Billy, spelt with an IE, billyflynn.com is where my blog goes. But it's also, you'll see it on LinkedIn and Instagram and whatever the social media channels are. I post a lot just because I want the stories out there.
Yeah. Well, we asked you about call signs back on episode 121, so we don't have to rehash that. But we can link to what you're doing and where you're doing it. What did I not ask you that you'd hope to cover today?
Look, you're doing great work. I think there's so many people that follow you. I wanted to talk to you at Tailhook. And you have this crowd following you everywhere you go. I think we said hello, and it's like, hey, I'll talk to you later.
I think they just wanted to see what I would do next because I had already done so many stupid things, okay?
So I really like what you do in the following. And the diversity of the people on here and the stories that we learn from, the older generations, plus the airplanes we've talked about. So thanks for having me on. It's been fun to come chat face-to-face this time and just go through this topic. I know it's kind of goofy, and you're thinking, it's
kind of soft and squishy.
Well, yeah, I pitched it to you, and you're like, okay, I'll let you come, but I can tell you're rolling your eyes going, I have no idea where this is going. Even as we prepped for this, you're like, really? What's in this? But I hope we understand that I have such respect for the men and women that fly jets, and they're just a different generation than us. And they are magical in a fifth generation jet. They are so much more lethal and capable. You and I could go fly an F-35. And you'd go kill a whole bunch of bad guys in any simulated exercise you had. But if you put those young nuggets in there and train them, they're orders of magnitude more lethal, more capable than we could ever be. So if we're going to let them be rock stars and be Jedi Knights, let's go out there and really make them be the best that they can be and really make them lethal, because we're going to ask them to go. Look, Putin's taught us that the piece is done in our time. And the real threat is out there. It's in Europe, it's in the Arctic, or it's in China. And we're going to make them live in a scenario that's going to be just impossibly hard. And let's go make them be rock stars. And so thank you for tolerating inviting me here and wherever this conversation was going to go, because I thought it was worth chatting about.
For sure. Thanks, Billy.
Thanks for having me here.
Hey, thanks for watching this episode of the Fighter Pilot Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. I still do every episode. Now, as a quick reminder, we try to explain all the jargon, but in case you missed something, head on over to fighterpilotpodcast.com, where we have a glossary of all the different terms we use. And while you're there, check out some of the cool merchandise that we offer. For additional content and to help support the show, please go check out our Patreon page. We'll see you next week.